This is from Anitha in Thrissur, India. I think silence can be cruel, especially the kind that settles after chaos. My shop was gone. The floor where I once stood barefoot frying snacks was now covered in ashes and dust. People used to call me Auntie Chips. Some said my snacks tasted like childhood. I didn't have much, but I had pride. Pride that I'd built something honest, something mine. That morning, standing before the wreckage, I felt stripped bare. Not just of my shop, but of my name, my purpose, my proof that I could stand on my own. I grew up among street vendors, where life was counted in rupees and rain clouds. My parents sold fritters from a cart, shouting over the noise of buses and scooters. I was the quiet one, the girl who memorized the rhythm of sizzling oil and laughter. I used to think those sounds were a kind of prayer, a promise that if you worked hard enough, life would feed you back. When I was 10, I told my mother I'd open a shop someday, one with walls, lights, and a name on the front. She laughed softly, not to mock me, but because dreams like that felt too far for people like us. Still, I carried that dream quietly, like a secret flame I refused to let go out. Starting my first stall was nothing grand, just a borrowed wok, a worn table, and the courage to face rejection. Men would stop by and ask, "Who's helping you?" I'd smile and say, "No one." My hands blistered, my clothes smelled of oil, and every evening I went home exhausted, but proud, because every coin in my jar was proof that I'd earned my place. Those were the days when I felt rich without knowing what that meant. Kids ran in after school for warm banana chips. Neighbors lingered for gossip and masala tea. I'd laugh, wiping my forehead with my apron, thinking, maybe this is what success feels like. Tired, greasy, but content. Then one morning I lifted the shutter and froze. The glass counter was shattered, shelves empty, cash drawer open. It wasn't just theft. It was like someone had erased years of my life overnight. The silence after was unbearable. I could hear my own heartbeat, asking questions I couldn't answer. Neighbors gathered, pretending to help, but mostly to watch. Someone whispered, "Poor woman, she worked so hard." Another said, "Maybe she shouldn't have run it alone." Their pity stung more than the loss. I wanted to shout, not because of what I'd lost, but because of how small they suddenly made me feel. At the hospital, I stared at the ceiling while machines hummed softly. The doctors said I was in shock. They didn't know it wasn't just my body that had collapsed. It was my belief that hard work was enough. Every beep of the monitor reminded me of my shop's rhythm, the life that had once kept me alive. When they discharged me, a nurse pressed 100 rupees into my palm. "For your bus fare," she said kindly. I looked at that wrinkled note for a long time. It felt small and meaningless, but also like the only thing that was truly mine. I tucked it into my pocket, not knowing that it would become the beginning of everything again. The first few days at home were quiet. No clatter of utensils, no customers calling my name. I would sit by the window, watching women hurry past carrying vegetables and children, wondering how they still moved through the same world that had stopped for me. One morning, I noticed 3 raw plantains left in my old basket. They were starting to spoil. I don't know why, but I peeled them anyway. I filled a small pot with oil, not even enough to cover my wrist, and lit the stove. The flame flickered. When the first slice hit the oil, that sharp hiss broke the silence I'd been drowning in. The smell of frying chips wrapped around me, familiar. It felt like life whispering, "You still know how to do this." A neighbor's kids smelled it before they saw me. They peeked over the gate wide-eyed and asked, "Auntie, are you selling again?" I didn't plan to, but I tore a piece of newspaper, poured a few chips into it, and handed it over. When they grinned and said, "So crispy," my throat tightened. I hadn't realized how much I missed that sound, someone enjoying what I made. The next day, I did it again. Not for profit, just to fill the emptiness. A few people stopped by, curious. One woman said, "You're really trying again?" I nodded, though inside I wasn't sure if I was trying or just surviving. I sold 5 paper cones that day. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes something is everything. I started saving again, 1 coin at a time. I washed out an old glass jar and wrote "New Start" on it with a marker that barely worked. Every clink of a coin inside sounded like hope echoing in a small room. I told myself, if I could fill this jar, I could fill my life again. But rebuilding isn't a montage. My palms burned from oil splatters, and my wrists ached from lifting the pan. I'd hear whispers. That's the woman who lost her shop. Poor thing. I smiled when they looked, but when I was alone, the smile always slipped. Sometimes I cried into my apron, quietly, so the oil wouldn't hiss at my tears. Just so you know, in India, fewer than 20% of entrepreneurs are women, and most begin with little or no support. Many face unspoken rules. Be cautious. Don't stand out. Don't dream too loud. But every woman who breaks those rules shifts the story for the ones who come next. Only about 1 in 5 small businesses that collapse in India ever reopen. The hardest part isn't recovering money. It's rebuilding faith. Faith in luck, in people, in yourself. And sometimes that faith costs more than any investment ever could. One day, the vendor who sold vegetables nearby noticed how I was managing with just a small pot. The next morning, he brought me an old frying pan. "This should help," he said, placing it on my counter. It was dented and blackened, but to me it gleamed like gold. That night, I whispered a thank you prayer, not for money, but for kindness. When the monsoon came, my tiny stall flooded. The water reached my ankles, and everyone packed up and ran home. But I stayed. I held an umbrella over my sizzling wok, flipping chips while raindrops hissed into the oil. Some people laughed, but others came closer and bought a few cones, cheering me on. That night, dripping wet and covered in flour, I laughed too, because I was still standing. Weeks turned into months. My regular customers started to recognize my voice before they saw me. "Anitha auntie, 2 cones please," they'd call from the corner. I began waking before dawn, peeling plantains while the city still slept. There was rhythm again in my life, quiet, steady, and mine. By the time festival season arrived, I had saved enough to rent a tiny kitchen space. It wasn't fancy, cracked walls, 1 flickering bulb, but it was safe. The first night I unlocked that door, I stood there for a long time, breathing in the emptiness. For the first time in years, I felt ownership without fear. Orders slowly grew. I learned to seal packets neatly, to write "thank you" on brown paper bags, even though my handwriting wobbled. People began calling my snacks a swathy hot chips. I didn't plan that name. A friend suggested it. But hearing it out loud felt strange, like my dream had put on new clothes. One afternoon, a reporter stopped by. He asked about my success story. The word made me laugh. Success? I told him I still wake up at 4 a.m., still worry about oil prices, still burn my fingers sometimes. He smiled and said, "That's exactly why people should hear your story." I didn't know whether to feel proud or shy. When they invited me to an award ceremony, I almost didn't go. I didn't own anything fancy to wear. My neighbor lent me a simple cotton sari and said, "Go, Anitha Chechi. You've earned it." The hall was full of people who spoke big English words. My palms were sweating when they called my name, but the applause felt soft, kind, like rain on dry earth. Afterward, people asked, "What's your secret?" I told them the truth, that it's not courage or genius, just stubbornness. Oil, patience, and pain, I said, all need time to settle. They laughed, thinking it was a joke, but I meant every word. A few months later, I passed by the old location of my shop. It had turned into a clothing store. Bright lights, mannequins in the window. I stood there quietly, watching families walk in and out. No one recognized me. The place had moved on, and so had I, in my own small way. Even now, I double lock my kitchen every night. Not because I expect thieves, but because I remember what it felt like to lose everything. Some scars don't fade. They just learn how to live beside you. I still jump at strange noises. I still count my coins twice. But I'm here. I'm still here. People say time heals, but I don't think it does. Not completely. It just softens the edges, turns screams into sighs. I still have moments when I stare at the oil shimmering in the pan and wonder how many versions of me it's seen. The dreamer, the worker, the broken woman, the one who came back. I don't call it success. I call it continuing. I'm not richer, just steadier. My shop isn't big, but it's honest, and it feeds more than hunger. It feeds hope. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it always was. If this story reminds you of something you lost, maybe it's still waiting for you, just in a different form. Sometimes the second life of a dream doesn't look like the first, but it can still taste just as sweet. If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real stories about people who keep going even when it hurts.